Today, more digital banking BS. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics for our latest post covering finance and property news. Well, the Senate inquiry into regional bank closures heard from a major bank that only 1% of transactions are over the counter, and they use that to justify regional branch closures. Speaking to the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Reference Committee hearings in Ingham, Queensland on the 18th of May, ANZ's General Manager of Retail Branch Network for New South Wales and the ACT, Michael Wake, explained branch transactions had halved over the past 5 years, and 1% of the bank's transactions were now being made over the counter in branches. Similarly, 8% of our customers only use our branches, and 81% of our customers haven't visited a branch in the last 12 months, Mr. Wake said. Now, of course, those are generic average numbers, nothing specifically about what's happening in the regional areas. The second day of the two hearings invited representatives from ANZ, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank and Suncorp, as well as local councillor and community members. The inquiry drilled down on the issues facing regional communities following bank closures, such as the social and economic costs to small businesses, agribusinesses, and the wider community. It also sought to understand the communication processes used by the banks to the communities when the decision to close had been made, noting several times the failings of banks to communicate with community members as addressed in the Coalition's Regional Banking Task Force. In fact, I would argue, listening to some of the discussion, that the banks don't want to communicate because they know the ructions if they do.
What we've learned today from the hearings and yesterday is that the banks still make as much money today with the bank's branches closed as what they did prior to they were closing. So clearly this is a clear breach of the social contract where banks are meant to provide services to the community. And in small communities like these, banking is a key pillar along with health and education. And I say if the banks aren't prepared to keep their branches open, then it's about time that the federal government looked at having a public bank to provide banking and insurance services out in regional Queensland and regional Australia. Thank you.
It'll just be another committee with a dust gathering book on the shelf unless we make some structural changes. We need a people's bank, a public bank. That's emerging well and truly. One of the most important things of the original public bank before it was gutted and neutered was that it provided accountability, because the big international banks had to face the competition from the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank was eventually neutered and removed, and then that lost the accountability, so now the big four banks are running roughshod over everyone. We need a public bank that can hold the big four banks accountable. We need real structural reform in this country.
We had, as a committee, invited Westpac to come to North Queensland and explain to the community why they were shutting branches here in Ingham and Tully and Cloncurry. Not long after we made that invitation, though, surprise, surprise, Westpac announced they wouldn't shut branches in North Queensland. And it seems to me that the one thing the banks are most afraid of is actually having to visit a regional country town. It seems to be the only way to get them to act is to force them to come out of their inner city lifestyles and into the bush. Well, it is unacceptable for our bank executives to have a phobia of the bush going forward. These are national banks, they receive national support, and all Australians deserve for them to be offering services right throughout our nation.
The Senate called out ANZ as showing more of a trend of being the first major bank to leave town, in addition to slashing around 60% of ATMs nationally, with 2/3 removed from Queensland. Since the start of 2021, ANZ has closed 56 regional branches, 21 in New South Wales, 19 in Victoria, 8 in Queensland, 4 in Tasmania, and 2 each in South Australia and Western Australia. ANZ's General Manager, Mr. Wake, explained the bank has 40,000 customers a month joining its app. Thus, its investment in digital banking is paramount to remain competitive. He added that when a branch closure was planned, Customers over the age of 65 were contacted to support the transition to digital banking. In most instances, 70% of them are very interested in learning digital banking things so that they don't have to go out. He said, "We'll have the customer come in and then go through the details of how they can bank, and then our customer care team do a follow-up phone call to check if they've done their first digital transaction. We know, however, that we need to support those who want to have a conversation about their banking." In considering alternatives, Mr. Wake explained ANZ continues to have regular dialogue with Australia Post, which offers the banking service Bank at Post for participating banks. However, ANZ remains the only major bank yet to participate in that program. Weighing in, ANZ Strategic Solutions Director Tony Tapsell added that some regional branches were working on a hybrid model where it's open for a fair part of the morning and then in the afternoon, doing other customer-focused work such as helping people with their home loans and helping people with their banking in a different manner. Given the ANZ-Suncorp proposed merger, which would see ANZ acquire the banking arm of Suncorp, the Senate asked what guarantees have been made to ensure that when there are both branches in a regional town, they will remain. Mr. Wake said there will be no Suncorp Bank branch closures within the 3-year transition period. However, he added that there were no plans regarding ANZ branches or beyond the transition period. The Senate said ANZ's no plans of closure inherently could mean a plan is hatched out tomorrow, and continued to push the subject with Suncorp Bank, asking whether Suncorp was concerned in the merger given the low representation of ANZ in regional markets and its overwhelming view of cutting regional banks. Suncorp Bank's Chief Executive Clive Van Horen reiterated that Suncorp would keep Queensland branches open for at least 3 years if the proposed merger gets the green light. And we've also committed that there will be no net job losses as a result of the transaction for at least 3 years in Queensland, Mr. Van Horen said. And Van Horen also added that Suncorp had not closed a regional branch since June 2022 and had committed to not closing any branches in 2023. However, he noted 10 regional closures in the first 6 months of the year 2020, while 49 branches closed overall. For every branch closed in the last 5 years by Suncorp, there has been a Bank at Post service out there with an average of only 500 metres of our branch location, Van Horen said. And he added that the most common transactions can be completed at the post office. And he said, "We do believe that Australia Post is an important part of the future. That was part of the Regional Banking Task Force recommendations and the ability for customers to do more and higher value transactions." And then Bendigo and Adelaide Bank spoke about the community bank model. While the bank has axed 12 community branches in the last financial year, it shared with the Senate how community banking can help regional communities. From a community bank perspective, community bank branches are the majority of our branches today. They said of the 430 branches, we operate around 300. That's according to Bendigo and Adelaide Bank's Chief Customer Officer, Richard Fennell. We provide all of the revenue to community bank branch operations. It's a shared revenue model where the businesses come in through a community bank branch. And he said that the bank then shares the revenue with the community bank, which is a 50-50 in some instances. The reality is 100% of the revenue generated by community banks go from Bendigo Bank, but it then provides revenue to support the community bank to pay for the costs that they incur in running the physical branch and employing the staff in that branch, Fennell said. Bendigo's community banking model came into effect in the late 1990s, and Fennell said expanding its physical footprint was the future. A similar model was shared with the Senate by Heritage Bank and People's Choice Credit Union on the first day of the latest inquiry, where it tipped startup costs by the community can be in excess of $500,000. And of course, the final report by the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Committee on the regional bank closures is expected to be handed down on 1st of December 2023. And of course, you will know that Dale Webster and myself were responsible for instigating this inquiry when we wrote to the Senate. But let me underscore once again that the evidence provided particularly by ANZ was deceptive insofar that it talked in generalities about what was going on across the country. The truth is that, of course, in regional areas, as my surveys have shown, More people need access to branch services, not least because digital access is much more limited. And therefore, unless you get into granularity here and look at individual case studies down on the ground, you're going to be misled as to what is going on. Sure, it's probably true that in capital cities, where 5G is now a thing, digital banking is easier, but it's not so in the bush, and it's not so in regional areas. And of course, it's still true that many small and medium enterprise businesses in those regions need access to cash handling services. And unfortunately, those provided by Bank at Australia Post are way too limited to be really useful for many. So we'll see how this inquiry goes. Clearly the issues are coming out, but of course the major banks continue to preach digital and therefore to an extent are misdirecting based on the truth of the situation. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.